This Historic Preservation Week, though, our theme is elegance in lines, Art Deco architecture in Sioux City. This happens to be a really nice neighborhood featuring Art Deco architecture. Obviously, the big centerpiece, which is not necessarily part of the Heights, is the Grandview Park Bandshell, which is an extraordinary example of Art Deco and modern architecture from the 1930s. Art Deco was born in France, part of the Arts Décoratif movement, which was applied to furniture, commercial design, and a little bit of residential design. There are a couple of houses in this neighborhood that are Art Deco in design, and that's a lot considering there are only about 4 in all of Sioux City. It's not it doesn't lend itself super well. Art Deco doesn't lend itself really well to residential architecture, but much more to commercial architecture and monumental monuments like the Bandshell. Many of the New Deal era projects, so those federally funded projects to get people to work during the Depression, many of these structures were designed in the Art Deco style. Things from new schools to places like the Grandview Park Bandshell, which itself was initially a CWA project turned into a Federal Relief Administration project turned into a WPA project completed in 1935, started in 1934. The Bandshell was initially conceived by the Monaghan Post Band. This was a group of musicians who were all World War I veterans. Upon their return home, many of them had been Sioux City Journal newsboys. Prior to World War I, they had a band, they had the Newsboys Band, which had started back in 1912. So they go off and fight, they come back, they become members of the American Legion, the Monaghan Post, and one of the divisions of the Monaghan Post was their band, their concert band / marching band, which went on to compete in international competition and in the early 1930s became the official band of the American Legion. They had won their first major contest and they would go on to be national champions of the American Legion bands. They did that at least 5 times prior to the construction of the Bandshell. So the Monaghan Post played on a small wooden pavilion here starting back in the 1920s. The citizens of Sioux City thought, we have a world-renowned band, we have the official band of the American Legion right here in Sioux City. This little wood pavilion isn't quite grand enough for them, so this Bandshell was the result. It was designed by a local architect, Henry Camp Hefner. Fundraising began in 1930, but 1930s were a terrible time for fundraising because here we are at the dawn of the Great Depression, and that depression would only grow more severe as we enter the mid and late 1930s. The federal government stepped in, offering projects that were already shovel-ready, projects that had been designed. So there was this CWA program of the New Deal, which was an emergency program. It had funding for just a few months, but that construction of the Bandshell began with that CWA money, then was picked up again by the Federal Relief Administration after the CWA funds had run out. And there are myriad other projects too, from the Public Works Administration, which built many schools, built several schools here in town, Webster School, the old Hobson School, and made funds available for additions to some of the other schools, many of which were designed in the Art Deco style. And through the 1930s, actually, a lot of Sioux City school buildings were being modernized by these PWA funds. And those schools, as they were being remodeled, their exteriors took on Art Deco elements, largely stepped pyramids, but you also see in some of the stone and concrete work, you will see zigzag lines and those geometric lines, things I was talking about with elements from the age of aviation, the age of the ocean liners, as well as those influences from Middle Eastern and Mesoamerican design, that had already been thousands of years old. Grandview Park dates back to 1908. It's when the park opened. It had long been home to this part of the city waterworks, the reservoirs. So the reservoirs here have been here since 1885. But this did not become a park until 1908. The main focus of the park at one time used to be at the south end of the reservoirs. That's where the first Grandview Park Rose Garden was located, on kind of a small plateau just to the south of the main reservoir. It wasn't until the 1930s when this area, which actually had been a dammed up little pond, there was kind of a little dam here and water flowing in would just kind of fill in this valley, and there used to be a pond here prior to the 1930s. That's just a neat little fact. When the Bandshell became kind of the focus of this park, the Rose Garden was built here just several years later in 1937. And then, of course, this Rose Garden has been renovated and remodeled and restored back in the early 2000s in 2002 and officially rededicated in 2003. That's when the new pergola were built and new rose beds were put in place. However, some of the rose plants date back to the 1930s while construction was going on here and this was being rebuilt. These were put in greenhouse storage, the roses. Now, there are obviously many new roses here as well, but there are some roses here that are probably getting really close to 90 years old.